Imagine getting your dream job at JPMorgan. 22, fresh out of college, and you're excited to start your career in investment banking. Then, before your first week at your job in investment banking is over, you manage to quietly lock in an offer at a private equity company. It has double the pay that you currently make and at better hours. Seems like a smart move, right? Well, not anymore, because JPMorgan just announced that if you do that, you're fired. And that's if you haven't done anything yet. Even if your job is in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, which is when the majority of these offers are for, it doesn't matter. And this isn't just some dramatic policy that one small bank in the country is doing. This is the biggest bank in the country that's saying enough. So what's going on here? Why is private equity suddenly becoming an enemy on Wall Street? Let's talk about it. The battle between banks and private equity definitely isn't a new concept, but it's definitely simmering and boiling over in a very public way recently. This whole situation comes down to a very old tension that exists in finance. Essentially, investment banks train people and private equity companies poach that talent very early on in their investment banking careers, give them an offer in 2 years' time, and when they're finally trained up, they then announce that they're leaving and they go to a private equity firm. However, this tension has finally reached its breaking point. For years, private equity firms have been speeding up recruiting. On-cycle recruiting for private equity firms has become earlier and earlier. And we're talking absurdly early. A lot of the times, investment banking analysts are recruiting for their next role in 2 years immediately upon joining. They're getting offers 1 month, 2 months into their careers in investment banking with the intent of working there for 2 years and then joining the private equity firm 2 years later. Some of them even lock in jobs before they join their investment banking desks in July. So now JPMorgan's drawing the line. If they found out that you've accepted an offer before you've worked there for 18 months, you're out. So at first glance, I admit it sounds pretty extreme, but in some ways I also get it. If you're a company that spends thousands of dollars every year training new grads in financial modeling, client work, deal execution, you ideally want to be able to keep and retain that talent. So in doing this, JPMorgan is trying to protect their investment in their analysts. Jamie Dimon, JPMorgan CEO, actually called the early recruiting unethical. And whether or not you agree with that, and I'm not sure if I do necessarily, it definitely puts investment banks in a weird spot. And now some of the biggest names in private equity are also going along with this. Apollo recently announced that they're slowing down their recruiting cycle. They're not interviewing or giving offers to anyone in the class of 2027. Their CEO, Mark Rowan, literally said that asking students to make long-term career decisions before they've even started their first job doesn't serve them in our industry. And honestly, I think that's refreshing to hear. Because let's be real, it's pretty ridiculous to ask someone to lock in an offer for a job that they're going to join in 2 years, especially when they're just figuring out how to even use PowerPoint or Excel properly at their very first adult job. I've talked to so many people who felt pressure to jump into private equity when they didn't even know if investment banking or finance was the right career path for them. And they felt pressured just because everyone else was doing so. On-cycle recruiting was a very big thing back when I was in investment banking, and everyone was interviewing behind the scenes and having to make excuses on their very first few months on the desk in investment banking. For the vast majority of these people, honestly, they didn't even know that they wanted it, but they just didn't want to get left behind their peers. The whole on-cycle recruiting has actually gotten so intense that it's almost impossible to actually take a step back and ask, do I think this is the right career path for me? And that's the downside of hyper early recruiting. Whether it's recruiting students in their sophomore year for investment banking or recruiting new grads for a private equity role in 2 years, you end up filtering out a lot of people who actually want to figure out what their career path looks like and not at such an early age. You miss out on people who are maybe later bloomers or who have more diverse experiences. And honestly, that's kind of the culture of finance these days. A lot of these people are very intense. The team looks the same, they all think the same, and they all have similar aspirations, but sometimes you want a little bit of diversity. When you especially seek people who are very intense, who start their cycle early, you oftentimes miss out on people who have more diverse perspectives and who come from a little bit of a different background. I mean, private equity is massive right now. It's over 1.2 trillion in dry powder globally, and these firms aren't just buying companies anymore. They're becoming lenders, asset managers, infrastructure builders, and more. The entire world is PE-backed at this point, and who they hire does matter, not just for them, but for the broader economy. So maybe a slower, more thoughtful recruiting cycle in general for both private equity and investment banking isn't such a bad thing. It honestly might give people the space to figure out what they really want, and then you'll have people in the role who actually want to be there, instead of people who felt FOMO'd into recruiting early just because all of their peers were. And then you give people the chance to actually stay in banking instead of knowing that they're going to leave in 2 years because they accepted an offer at 22 when they first started on the desk in their first job. Or you give people the option to pivot to something entirely. Give them some time to just slow down and think. And I think that's a really good thing. Okay, so what's next? Well, here's what I think could happen. For one, I think that more firms are going to follow Apollo's footsteps and pump the brakes on on-cycle recruiting. Two, this isn't just private equity's fault, it's also the bank's fault for not retaining their analysts. There's a reason why retention is really bad in investment banking and a lot of people jump ship. Oftentimes there's better pay or hours or both out there. Banks could get a little bit more creative with things like retention bonuses, clawbacks, or deferred comp. Basically finding a way to keep people a little bit longer, or just offering better benefits in general. Third, I could also see some private equity firms using this opportunity of certain large firms like Apollo stopping on-cycle recruiting to take their chance and grab talent early. And four, I could also see nothing really changing from this, especially if no other bank or private equity firm decides to follow suit of JPMorgan or Apollo. And that's the truth. Wall Street has tried to self-regulate a lot before. There have been banks that imposed no Zoom videos on Friday, or banks that have imposed strict working hours. But a lot of these things are very difficult to regulate, especially because there's so many teams within investment banking that have their own culture. So I can also see this as something that hasn't stuck, but hopefully it creates some momentum in the industry. And honestly, if you're watching this as someone who has just started out in investment banking or private equity, or you're thinking about going into either role, just know that it's really okay to not have it all figured out. Speaking as someone who is 28 years old now and has gone through investment banking and is now in corporate development, which is a fairly common path with a finance undergrad major, just know that I also don't have things figured out, and you might be following the path in your early 20s, but a lot of the people, once they reach their late 20s or their early 30s and even later on in life, they do pretty big career changes sometimes, especially when they finally have the time to just think about what they want to do and what looks right for them. So it's okay to want to explore, to ask yourself what you actually want instead of what everyone else is chasing. And it's also okay to just do a career for the meantime if you're not sure what you want to do and slowly figure that out by a process of elimination. And hopefully, in my opinion, I don't necessarily hope that more banks decide to fire you if you find a future role within your first 18 months of working, but I certainly do hope a lot of private equity firms follow suit along Apollo in terms of slowing down their on-cycle recruiting and delaying it further, because that'll give a lot more people just time to think about what's right for them. So yeah, this might seem like a small story about job offers and firing, but I think it touches on a much bigger point in the industry. Because the question is, how do you build a career while still being thoughtful, while having the time to slow down and think about what you actually want to do? And how do companies actually invest in their talent without losing them before their talents even started on the desk? And how do you actually make space for people to figure out what they want to do without burning them out? If this helped you make sense of what's going on, or even just gave you something to think about, comment down below, give it a like, share it with a friend. I would love to hear any of your thoughts. Do you think it's right for JPMorgan to fire analysts for taking a job offer too early? Is this whole system just broken with on-cycle recruiting being earlier and earlier every year? Let's talk about it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!